Tonight, we journey into the story of Japan. Sea breath moves along a chain of islands as you listen, a gentle rhythm that steadies your chest. Pines hold the cliffs with quiet hands. Inlets fold into coves where tide pools glow like patient lanterns. Rivers wind from snowy volcanic shoulders and lay silver paths across valleys. You pass under a simple gate of red wood, a doorway open to sky and open to time, and you feel a room with no roof take shape inside you. You might struggle to endure what they once lived through. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step onto a shingle shore where pebbles click beneath your feet. Smoke rises from a ring of stones, and cedar breathes through the dusk. In a circle of low huts, a child hands you a vessel still warm from the fire. The clay holds spirals and ladders of cord impressions, a memory pressed by woven fiber while the earth was soft. You turn the vessel and feel one of the oldest arts on the planet settle your breath. The hands that shaped it knew patience. They harvested clay, pounded grit into the body, coiled and smoothed and pressed, then waited while flame did its quiet work. The pot is simple and sure. It proves that a community learns to care for life by caring for craft. Beside the hearth rests a line of small clay figures, eyes open wide, arms lift, bellies carry the curve of birth and promise. You lift one carefully and feel the weight of a neighbor's hope resting in your palm. It does not explain itself. It shimmers with meanings that live just beyond words, hints of health and safe arrivals, and the easing of pain. The figure becomes a companion for nights of storm and for mornings when the nets return light. A nation often begins in such silent promises, in the resolve to keep watch over the fragile places where life arrives, in the courtesy of hands that serve what they cannot fully name. You follow a path to a slope where pale bands of shells sleep under thin grass. The mound bends along the ridge like a quiet river. Here the earth keeps stories in layers. Fish bones and broken points lie beside fragments of fired clay. Laughter once moved through this place. Faint crackle rises again when wind calms the grass. You kneel and feel heat from the day still pooled in the shells. The sea was pantry and teacher. The forest was storehouse and shelter. Work moved with season and tide, not with clocks. You stand and look toward a clearing where a circle of stones waits in evening light. The ring steadies the ground and lifts the sky. It seems to measure more than space. It seems to keep a calendar made of patience and stars, though the exact lesson never speaks in a single line. Night arrives with steady hands. The camp stores nuts and dries fish. Hides stretch over poles to keep out frost. Dogs curl along the walls and warm the quiet near the fire. You cut saplings, lash them with vine, and learn that good work asks for attention more than clever speech. Trees fall at the right moon and cure in shade. Rope gains strength when each strand respects the others. Tools last when hands treat them with modest care. You see how humility keeps a camp alive, how a rule of courtesy forms not on paper but in habit, in the way the elders pass a knife, in the way a child waits before speaking. Rain begins in the morning like 100 brushes painting paper. You follow a stream into a cedar grove where mist hangs low and cool. A gate stands at the water's edge. You step beneath it and feel the air change. On a flat stone, a shallow bowl mirrors leaves that drift and settle. White paper strips hang from a rope, clean and bright. No words fill the space, yet calm enters the bones. You bow because the world is old. You rinse your hands because you are a guest here. A sprig of evergreen rests against a smooth rock. Nothing is hurried, nothing is loud. In this stillness, reverence becomes a habit as natural as breath. By the bay, potters lift tall flame rims from a kiln. The edges curl and climb like petals touched by fire. Amber and smoke color the clay. Water waits in a jar. Fire licks the cooled lip. Your eyes travel between them, as if between pulse and breath. Nearby, a canoe moves along a dark band of water. The paddle dips and rises. The hull works with the sea instead of against it. The island teaches by motion. Bend and you will not break. Wait for the right hour to leave. Wait for the right hour to return. Keep craft at the center, and the center will hold. A runner arrives with obsidian wrapped in bark. The shine is dark and sharp, a gift from far coasts and old mountains. Trade draws islands closer without ink or borders. The map is kept in memory, in the taste of a spring, in the color of a headland at dawn. You sit with elders who speak names for each wind and each current. From a distance, the sea looks like a wall. Up close, it becomes a long road lined with lessons. The people face it with care and with respect. That respect becomes a rule stronger than any decree, a law carried in muscle and tide, and the soft voice of caution that keeps small boats near wisdom. There are days when the sky opens and the horizon shows a blue line far beyond the waves. On such a day, someone tells of a summer when a boat arrived with a bundle of seeds and a way of planting that love still ponds. The tale joins other tales. No story is forced to the front. Patience holds the circle in place. For now, hands still gather and hunt and weave and shape clay with cords. A seed can rest in the soil for a long time before breaking the surface. Change waits until ground and season are ready, and when it comes, it will move like a tide through quiet inlets, not like a storm thrown against rock. At sunset, you walk to the marsh edge. Reeds move like an audience, and frogs stitch the evening with sound. A flock of birds rises. Wings trace letters that appear and fade. You breathe with them and sense a future shore bright with shallow fields, banks cut true, families resting on thresholds, while water ticks softly beyond the door. You let the image rest where it belongs, near but not yet, like lantern light behind a paper screen. The camp does not leave gold or glitter. It leaves sturdy tools and circles of stone and long walls of shell. It leaves cord marks pressed into clay. It leaves figures that keep watch. It leaves a way of greeting the morning and closing the day with the same steady care. It leaves a faith that chooses duty over display. It teaches that the heart of a nation begins in the patience of hands, and the way a community listens to weather and song, and the advice of elders who know which tree bends and which tree holds. You lie near the last embers and watch sparks climb. Old arts keep long lives. The cord mark holds its spiral. The shell mound holds its curve. The stone ring keeps the place where earth and sky meet outside the reach of clocks. People rise with the sun and return with the sunset. Thanks is offered before any other speaking. Work begins with what lies near. Tools are lifted with care. The fire settles. Waves keep breathing. In that rhythm, the earliest pottery of these islands becomes a quiet milestone, a sure fact that anchors the story, while the true promise sealed inside each little clay figure remains softly veiled. The night folds in, and you feel the island hold you the way a good house holds warmth, simple and strong, ready for the next day and the next tide. Dawn opens like a thin gold line along the marsh, and you rise to the hush before the first heron steps. The ground under your feet feels different now. A lattice of earthen banks holds shallow rectangles of water that mirror the paling sky. You roll a seed between your fingers and press it into the soft mud. A new rhythm enters the islands through these quiet fields, a rhythm that follows seedlings and rain and the measured release of water from one terrace to the next, steady as breath, patient as tide. You walk the dikes and learn patience in motion. A wooden sluice lifts, a floodgate lowers. The mirrored surface breaks and gathers again. Families stand in a row, ankles in the cool silt, passing bundles of young rice like careful lanterns. Songs move down the line to keep timing even. Work begins in a hush that feels like prayer and ends with gentle laughter that trusts the next day to meet you here again. No drum is needed. The water keeps the beat, and the fields give their quiet answer. By the granary, a raised floor keeps pests from the grain. Pillars rest on stones shaped like mushrooms so mice cannot climb. The smell of straw and husk hangs in the air. A loom waits under the eaves, its warp set straight, its weft ready for the shuttle. Hands smooth fibers into thread, and the cloth that forms carries the sheen of water and sky. In the open yard, a carpenter planes a board with a blade of iron. The curl falls like a ribbon, and the board answers with a clear note when he taps it. On a ridge above the patties, a bell of bronze rests in a bed of reeds. Its face is patterned with steps and with deer that lift their heads as if listening. When the bell speaks, the village gathers. Rice begins with mud and ends with ceremony. A cup of clean water is placed at the edge of a field. A branch of evergreen leans against the lip of the bell. Wind passes and the metal gives a voice that seems older than language. The sound drifts over the water and settles like soft rain. You carry a hoe with an iron edge and feel how the earth yields. Stones that once demanded long hours now break with a single clean strike. A blade of iron turns the soil and keeps its sharpness through a day of work. The old stone tools still hang in the shed and hold their quiet dignity, yet the new ones shorten the distance between hunger and fullness. In a trench beside the paddies, a wooden plow waits with a yoke shaped for a small ox. Some plots accept only human strength, and that strength answers with a steady pace that does not boast. Near the edge of the settlement, a trench circles the houses. Posts rise at measured gaps, and a walkway climbs a watchtower whose platform holds baskets and a coil of rope. Smoke from distant fires appears on clear evenings, and sometimes arrows return with barbed points still set. The moat keeps boundaries clear without words. At the gate, elders greet visitors with calm courtesy, offer a drink of fresh water, and listen before the day's business begins. Courtesy becomes a fence made not of wood, but of habit. In a house of packed earth walls and a roof of thatch, pots line a low shelf. Their surfaces no longer carry the old spirals of cord. The clay looks plain and sure, shaped for cooking and storage rather than display. A jar of grain rests beside a jar of salt, both sealed with leaf and twine. A child watches steam lift from a pot and asks for a taste without speech, only by lifting a lacquered bowl the way others taught them. You hand it over and feel the warmth travel into your palms and slow your breathing. By the shore, a long canoe slides out with baskets of grain and coils of rope. The prow meets a light swell and keeps steady. You travel along the coast to a harbor where new metals and new methods move with the tide. A trader lifts a cloth and shows a mirror that catches dawn and holds it like a small lake. Another sets out a bundle of fine blades wrapped in straw. From these exchanges, a village deepens its skill. Fingerprints travel without names, and techniques pass from hand to hand like embers shielded in ash. At night, the bell is buried on the slope. The pit receives it with care, and a thin layer of soil covers the metal until only grass remains. In the seasons to come, the bell will be lifted again and allowed to speak, then lowered back into the earth. No one writes a reason. The act itself holds the reason. To keep rice alive, people keep rhythm alive. A year rises and falls like quiet breathing, and ceremony becomes a bridge between what grows and what is hoped for when the sky turns and the rains return. You enter a broad enclosure in the Western Islands, where a ring of towers frames a hall of meetings. People arrive from nearby hamlets with baskets tied across their backs. Bundles of grain change hands. Coils of rope and jars of salt find new owners. Iron tools and bronze bells travel between families with words of promise and with gifts that keep trust warm. A dispute settles over a shared meal, barley on a wooden tray and fish steamed in leaves, while a small mirror rests where everyone can see their own face and remember their place. Between one season and the next, a messenger brings a tale from across the sea. The path runs through river mouths and along a coast where cranes sleep on gravel bars at dusk. It tells of wide fields and of elders who measure a year by gatherings whose songs do not match yours and yet feel familiar. The way this knowledge arrives stays hard to see. Part of it must have sailed here in boats. Part of it seems to have risen inside these islands, as if the soil itself remembered. The blend remains in gentle shadow, and the story accepts that shade. In the heat of late summer, you sit on a narrow bank while dragonflies knit the air. The paddies shine like mirrors set edge to edge. Frogs click in the ditches. A team of neighbors shifts water from one plot to another, their steps slow and even. The work becomes a lesson in duty among neighbors. One family cannot harvest without another. An upstream gate opens so a downstream terrace can drink. The canal stays clear because everyone remembers what neglect brings. In the evening, a common store counts full baskets and sets aside enough for those who fell ill. Harvest arrives with clean air and long light. Stalks bend under the weight of grain. Sickles whisper as they move through the field. Bundles rise in neat cones that dry in the breeze. Children chase sparrows from the stacks and then sleep beside the granary door. The village makes a low fire and sets a pot to steam. Rice glows inside the lid. The first bowl is lifted in both hands and placed before a shelf shrine where smooth stones, a sprig of green, and a small mirror wait. Gratitude moves like warm water through the chest. On a night when the moon stands clear, elders speak in slow voices. They remember a time when nets and shells alone kept the camp alive. They recall the first measured field, and the day a canal reached the far terrace and shut its gate with a satisfying click. They tell of a watchtower raised before the rains and of a fence repaired after a hard season. Their stories do not carry names for glory. They carry the name of the stream that feeds the lowest paddy and the name of the ridge where the bell rests. You lie down in a house that holds the smells of straw and smoke. The last ember glows and then fades as the hush of the paddies rises. Somewhere a bell sleeps under a thin cover of soil. Somewhere a mirror waits in a woven wrap. The future stirs like light through reed screens. An age of tomb fields and greater courts draws near, carried on the current that began when a seed met a patient hand in mud. For now, the islands breathe with their new craft. The sure fact of wet rice farming anchors the story, while the path of the newcomers who helped carry seed and metal across the water remains softly veiled, a line on the map that the tide keeps erasing and writing again. Morning mist lies low over a wide plain, and you walk a line of water where reeds nod and moorhens stir. The ground swells ahead like a gentle hill that takes the shape of a keyhole when seen from the sky. A moat circles the mound in a calm band, then another, then a third, each ring holding the earth in a patient embrace. The slope is faced with trimmed turf and packed clay. Stones mark the edges in clean curves that invite quiet steps. You pause at the foot of the rise and feel the weight of a new kind of power, a power that rests in earth rather than speech. The people build tombs that reshape valleys, and the valley learns to speak back in long, measured lines. Terracotta figures keep watch along the terrace. They stand in calm ranks, hollow and steady, their surfaces carrying the warm memory of a kiln. Some wear simple caps and robes. Some show the curve of a horse's neck and the tight geometry of a bridle. Others hold shields and sit in small houses with open windows. They do not shout. They stand and allow the air to pass through their centers. Their presence feels like a promise that the mound will not stand alone. The figures are companions to the sleeping, a circle of neighbors who never tire. You follow a path to a flat space at the top where offerings once rested. A polished disc of bronze would have shone here in morning light. The face of the disc holds ridges and little mountains, and a band where patterns step outward like ripples. When sunlight meets the mirror, the whole hill seems to breathe. People who stand near it feel tone pass through their chests, as if the metal were a bell that speaks without sound. Mirror, sword, and jewel begin to travel together as signs of a line that claims the right to steady the land. The three are lifted with care and carried in processions that move like slow rivers under banners that rise and fall with the day. Horse hooves change the sound of the road. You hear leather creak and metal click as riders appear from a stand of pines. Saddles sit high. Bits shine, stirrups hang ready. With horses, a day widens. Messages move across the plain before the sun swings past its middle point. Fields and river crossings fall into a new order. Armor gleams at the shoulder and at the hip. The smell of oiled wood and iron mixes with crushed grass. The islands learn the feel of a mounted world, and bonds of oath and service bind people who once knew only village ties. Below the mound, a workshop hums. Workers cast bronze and clay molds. A mold is shaped, dried, heated, and then broken to free the bell or mirror inside. The maker knows that perfection leaves through the smoke and that what remains bears small asymmetries that give the piece its life. Ironworkers draw blades and spear points from a furnace that glows like a second sun at dusk. The smell of charcoal holds to hair and clothing. Children stand at a safe distance and count the hammer strokes. Each ring in the ear marks another step toward a day when iron and grain and cloth support a court with long reach. At the edge of the workshop, a guest from across the strait warms his hands. He traces map lines in the dust with a thin stick. He tells of other courts and other tombs and leaves a new technique when he departs. The path his boat followed remains a little unclear, not through carelessness, but because travel spreads like water through reeds. Influence arrives along more than one channel and leaves no single line to pin to a chart. The mound on the plain still rises either way. The figures still stand with their hollow calm. The mirror still draws dawn into a bright circle. You enter a low chamber within a smaller tomb where an iron sword rests in a long box. On the blade, a trail of tiny characters glitters, set in gold so fine that a fingertip feels only smoothness. The letters carry a memory of names and of seasons. Generations unfold along the steel, the way rice terraces step down a hillside. A sword like this gives a sure date you can carry in your hands. It speaks of rulers who counted their ancestors carefully, and of a court that sent gifts and received them during a century when writing traveled with metal and with silk. A messenger arrives with a lacquered tablet that holds a record copied from a distant capital. It speaks of a land of Wa, of envoys who cross rough water, of a woman who once governed through quiet influence and ritual calm. Her seat remains hard to place on the map, as if mist still keeps her privacy. Some point toward distant hills and inland plains. Others look to coasts that open toward the morning. The story accepts both views and walks onward, while the name hums like a shell held to the ear. On the southern side of the plain, another mound rises, longer and higher, with moats as broad as small lakes. Pine and camphor make high islands of shade along the water. Boats would have moved in slow circles on certain days, with drums that paced each stroke. Tradition grants this mound a sleeping sovereign. You stand at the moat and feel the human scale fall away. The earthwork ranks among the largest made by human hands. A single will cannot move such soil. Only thousands of hands guided by order and belief can lift a valley into a monument that outlives war and weather. Below the mound roads knit villages to granaries and granaries to halls where decisions are spoken. Clans arrive under their banners and sit in arranged circles. A steward counts tribute of cloth and grain. A smith receives ore for tools. A priest lifts a mirror so the room can steady its breath. The court learns how to extend care to distant fields without letting the line go slack. In the evening, a flute draws a thin silver line through the air, while men and women sit in clear ranks and let their shoulders soften. By moonlight, the figures along the terrace draw soft shadows on the turf. A watchman passes and taps the back of each one with the tip of his staff. The sound is hollow and kind. The mound holds the silence that follows. You sense how authority settles into the land through ceremony, craft, and labor, rather than through a single moment of noise. The key event is not one battle, but the steady appearance of these great tombs across many provinces, each with its ring of water and its circle of clay companions, each a compass that points both inward and outward toward an early kingship. Before dawn, you look back once more. The moat is ink. The turf is slate. A narrow mist trims the water. Somewhere behind the curve of the mound, a chest holds mirrors that once caught the sun, and a jewel that once held the color of fresh leaves. The early kings have no need to speak. The earth speaks for them. Their roots touch rivers that reach the sea and channels that run beyond the horizon, though the first joining of all these threads stays softly hidden like a channel under reeds. You step from the grass to the road and feel the islands turn toward halls of law and temple bells, carried by what these tomb fields set in place. You enter the Asuka Plain as morning light turns the reed beds to pale gold. Roof tiles gleam with the sheen of rain just past. A bell speaks from a timber hall, and the sound settles into water that holds a small island of stones and moss. The air smells of clay and smoke and a thin thread of incense. In this soft valley, a new way of seeing takes root. At Asukadera, a tall figure of bronze sits with hands set in calm mudra, the metal cast by craftsmen who learned to pour a stillness into shape. Soga no Umako stands with priests who fold robes the color of pine bark and saffron. A bowl of clear water rests before the statue, alongside a sprig of evergreen and a small mirror that gathers the light. You step across a wooden threshold where lacquer shines like night. Sutra scrolls sleep in carved boxes. A monk draws a brush through dark ink, and the characters appear like little currents that will carry thought between shores. Children watch the strokes as if watching a river map being made. The hall breathes with cedar and with the faint scent of smoke from a brazier, where pellets of fragrant wood release their song. You feel how the room teaches without noise. A visitor bows, hands rise to brow and heart, and the message travels through gesture rather than decree. In a nearby palace of painted screens and fitted pillars, a young regent listens more than he speaks. He wears a cap edged with brocade, and servants attend with measured steps. His counsel steadies the court of his aunt, Empress Suiko, and the realm takes to the custom of ranking not by birth alone, but by grade of cap and color of silk. You see a scroll that holds a set of articles written in a clear hand. Harmony sits near the top, not as softness, but as a way to guide strength. Justice appears, not as a sword, but as a scale kept level by calm attention. Reverence for the three treasures rests beside loyalty to the ruler and care for the people. The paper feels light, yet the habit it asks for feels durable, a weave of duty that will not tear easily. Envoys prepare at a coastal station. A ship waits on rollers of wet cedar. Sails of hemp rise and fall with the breeze. Gifts are packed into chests bound with cords. Mirrors lie in padded sleeves, blades are wrapped in straw. Screens painted with pines are tied shut against spray. Ono no Imoko steps aboard with a letter that greets an emperor across the continent with a voice steady and proud, the voice of a land that sees itself in the morning sun. The hull slides into the channel. You hear the slap of water against planks and the creak of rope. On deck, a boy holds a thin wind bell and listens to the sea carry new roads toward the islands. The ship returns with men who have seen immense walls, broad avenues, and monasteries with halls as vast as fields. They bring calendars, medicine, temple plans, and ways of carving that catch the flow of robes and the fold of a quiet smile. Carpenters in Asuka test joints that lock without nails and set columns on stones shaped to shed rain and guard against rot. Artisans lay tiles in careful lines. Painters grind mineral blues and greens that carry the cool of rivers onto plaster. Your fingers pass along a beam so smooth it feels like still water. On a day of clear sky, you walk into a compound where a 5-storied pagoda lifts like a tree that counts the layers of wind. The central pillar runs through the heart of the tower, sunk in a stone base and rising toward a finial that turns the light. Inside, a small world unfolds in carved scenes. Lotus petals open along a base. Guardians stand with eyes fixed on a point beyond the door. A bronze halo holds a radiance that seems to turn slowly even when the room is quiet. Cypress trunks breathe a scent that steadies the head. The building stands as a symbol of a mountain held within wood, a place where ascent can happen without distance. Dancers from the continent teach masked performance in a court garden where sand has been raked into waves. Drums speak in low circles. A flute draws a line that seems to hover above the pond. Masks of strong features and high brows rest on polished stands before they rise into motion. You sense how music and movement carry instruction into the body more softly than written rule. A child imitates the pattern of steps at the edge of the gathering and laughs when the timing fits. A shrine stands not far from the hall, its gate opening to a grove of camphor. Paper strips whisper along a sacred rope. The old way does not retreat. It stands and listens and welcomes a companion. A priest of the grove and a monk of the hall share tea in a room with reed screens rolled half open. Wind moves across the tatami and carries the scent of leaves. A language of greeting grows between them, and you see how two paths can keep one landscape without crowding each other. Chronicles speak of a first arrival of a gilded image and sutras tied with silk from a western kingdom. One scroll places the year at one count. Another sets it earlier, as if the gift had walked into the islands twice by different doors. The valley lets both memories breathe. What matters to the day before you is the sight of tiled eaves, the sound of a bell, and the taste of new learning shared across sea roads that never sleep. The court grows used to documents on wooden tags and seals pressed into clay. A messenger presents a tablet that confirms a grant of rice fields to support a temple. The tablet is narrow, the script is neat, the authority it carries feels new and precise. At the evening meal, officials sit in rank and turn their bowls with a quiet unity that the cap and rank system has taught. A singer lifts a voice that threads the hall with a poem about cranes rising over the Asuka River. Governance becomes a craft that seeks calm edges as carefully as a carpenter planes a beam. You visit Horyuji after a long walk through fields where small irrigation channels glimmer with fish. The temple rises with a confidence that does not shout. Paintings in a hall show bodhisattvas with halos like morning. The pigments have the softness of age and the firmness of good mineral. A child counts the brackets that fly from the pillars and stops only when sleep blurs the edges of sight. Craftsmen leave signatures in tiny places. A single curve, a swell of wood, a corner of a cloud. The work teaches without speech that skill is a form of prayer. The regent grows older. His image travels on painted screens that show him holding a scepter, sleeves falling in quiet folds. He sends students to study and welcomes teachers who bring new readings of the same sutras and new cures for the same fevers. He speaks of harmony the way farmers speak of water, not to soothe weakness, but to guide strength. The palace grows still when he enters, and grows thoughtful when he departs. In later years, memory will add threads to his robe and patches to his words. The cloth remains useful, even as some stitches belong to hands that came after. Before you leave the valley, you stand by the river as dusk draws lines across the water. A bronze bell floats on its voice for a long moment before the sound fades. Behind you are tiled eaves and scrolls that carry teachings to those who can read. Ahead of you are halls that will one day gather all officials under a code written as clearly as a carpenter's square. The sure fact lies in the early triumph of temple building and in the envoys who crossed salt water in 607 to anchor the islands in a larger world. The mystery lingers in how far a single regent's will reached into daily life and how much of his song was later harmonized by those who loved the tale. Night gathers gently, and the path points toward a new capital where order will sit on an even larger seat. Morning breaks over a city drawn with straight lines and careful squares, and you enter along an avenue that runs toward a hall of timber and tile. The ground feels firm under your sandals. The drainage ditches sing a thin song after night rain. Roofs lift their eaves like wings that rest. You walk between earthen walls and new gates where guards in lacquered caps nod without hurry. A capital has been planted here, with method and with faith. It holds the name Heijo, and it looks toward the world with measured confidence, a grid set like a calm mind. Market bells sound on the left and on the right. Traders set baskets of millet and rice on mats and display cloth dyed in deep indigo. A peddler turns a small drum and a tame deer steps from the shade as if the city were a garden. You touch a post warm from the sun. Messages hang from it on wooden slips. Each line of ink carries grain or labor or a request for travel. Codes formed in earlier years now find their feet in these avenues, and offices learn to move paper with the same care smiths give to iron. You enter the precinct of Kofuku and pass a gate where lanterns sleep in daylight. A 5-story tower rises with calm power. Its central pillar serves as a steady spine. Wind lifts the edges of banners that wait for a festival. Across the river, another complex gleams. Halls painted the color of cinnabar, roofs edged like waves. Yakushi receives prayers for healing. Monks copy sutras until the brush tip looks like a soft reed. The scent of ink and pine fills the galleries. You hear the soft rasp of paper and feel the mind slow to match it. In a quiet office, a clerk ties a cord around tablets that record the census. He arranges them in bundles that fill a lacquered chest. A senior official marks a seal in clay and sets it to dry near the window. Outside, lines of conscripts carry timber toward a project larger than any the capital has yet seen. Talk moves through tea stalls about a great figure of bronze that will sit with a hand lifted in fearless promise. The air itself seems to wait for the moment when eyes carved in gold leaf will meet the light. You follow the road until the city falls away and temple woodlands gather. A main hall stands among cypress trunks. Beams cross with weight and grace. Beyond them, a taller hall rises with scaffolds like a second forest. Workers carry molds of clay and sand. Furnaces glow with a light that looks like dawn broken loose inside earth. Copper flows along channels as if a river were learning a new path. Artisans guide the shine into the shape of a calm face and folded robes. Years of casting and joining come together in a ceremony when the eyes open and the hall fills with voices that sound like surf. You step out along a path where 2 deer cross the light like warm shadows. They graze near stone lanterns that will burn during festivals. A child holds a rice cracker and laughs when a soft nose brushes a palm. The animal lifts its head and moves with a poise that suggests old protection. The city accepts them as neighbors and messengers, and the lanes near the shrine carry this courtesy into daily life. Sacred presence and ordinary errands share the same street and the same rhythm of footfalls on packed earth. Far to the north of the main hall stands a treasure house with walls that breathe cedar and a roof that meets the sky with sober lines. Inside, a lute sleeps in a case lined with patterned silk. Brocade from distant deserts rests in rolls that still shine when they meet the sun through a half-open shutter. A glass bowl holds a color like winter sea. These objects carry the taste of roads that cross continents. You press your palm to the wood and feel how careful storage turns memory into a craft. How each piece traveled here remains partly veiled, a trail of hands and ships that the dust keeps to itself. Orders travel outward along the imperial roads. The court names provincial temples and asks each region to raise one for men and one for women, with bells that can be heard across fields and rivers. Carpenters in distant districts cut pillars at the right moon and float them down to the site. Villagers bring stones for the base and grain for the workers. Monks arrive with bundles of scriptures and a single painting rolled tight. When the bells ring on the same morning across many valleys, the land feels its shape inside a net of sound. The network stores learning the way a granary stores rice. At court, the Fujiwara rise with an ease that looks like nature but rests on skill and design. Marriages weave influence through chambers where screens glitter with mineral hues. A figure enters a hall with sleeves that whisper over tatami and a hairpin that catches the light. Decisions follow the path of kin and office. Etiquette hardens into form the way lacquer hardens on wood. The city learns to move with the rhythm of great families while still honoring the legal codes that lie in neat lines on bamboo and paper. A clerk carries a bound book of songs to a veranda where plum trees begin to open. Voices recite poems that speak of fields and tides and love carried like a secret in the sleeve. The verses come from many mouths and many provinces. Some sound like shore wind at dusk. Some sound like a farmer's breath after a row is finished. The collection turns the country into a single long song. You listen and feel the capital hold its people in both law and lyric, a balance that steadies the heart as day turns. In a smaller hall, a scholar opens a chest and lifts two old chronicles. The script moves with an even hand. The pages tell of gods who walked in morning mist and of early rulers who tied the land together with rites that honored heaven and earth. The stories place roots in soil and in sea spray and lift a line of descent toward the present. How these books were shaped by court hope and village memory stays in gentle fog. Myth and record sit beside one another, and neither one cancels the other. Sickness moves along the avenues during a harsh year. Shrines fill with offerings of rice and salt. Candles burn in tight clusters before images of healing. Grain stores open. Orders flow to hasten the building of halls and to send support to distant districts. People say that grief poured into bronze and wood as a way to steady hearts. The measure of loss cannot be counted now with certainty, yet tenderness still clings to the eaves when rain falls straight and soft. The great figure at the temple becomes a promise that suffering will meet mercy. At sunset, you walk the northern wall and look across tile that seems to run to the far edge of vision. Smoke from cooking fires rises in blue threads. From a garden compound, a gagaku ensemble sends slow notes into the air. A dancer lifts a sleeve and turns like a leaf caught in a mild current. The sound makes the city feel like a single vessel that holds many streams. The order is not tight like a fist. It is steady like a hand that carries water without spilling. Night lanterns come alive in the precinct of Kasuga. Stone bodies line the path in long, patient rows. Paper shades glow like warm moons in a grove of cedar. You bow at the gate and hear bells answer from the hills. Somewhere scribes bend over paper by oil light, copying characters that will outlast them. Somewhere a mother hums while turning rice in a pot. The sacred order of this capital draws its lines through kitchens and dormitories as surely as through throne rooms, and the city seems to breathe with one chest. Before you leave, you stand again before the great figure whose gaze looks past you with endless calm. The hall breathes with late light. Swallows cut the air beneath the beams and vanish into their nests. The floor holds the sound of straw sandals coming and going. Your breath matches the quiet rhythm of the place. A city planned with squares and gates has taught a generation how to move through law and ceremony without losing the softness of daily kindness. The sure fact lies in the move to Heijo, and in the great eye-opening of the bronze Buddha at Todaiji. Moments that set order and mercy side by side. The reach of legal codes into the smallest village lane remains partly hidden, a depth of influence that the records do not fully reveal. Night gathers, and the road ahead points toward a court of perfumes and poems where ink ripples like moonlight on a canal. You arrive along a canal at first light, and the city ahead glows as if drawn with a single calm brush. Streets run straight and true. Streams braid through gardens and slip under bridges of cypress. A carp ripples the surface, and the ring widens toward a gate where vermilion pillars meet a sky the color of pale silk. A new capital breathes here. Courtiers speak its name in low voices that carry pride and a wish for long seasons of order. In the year 794, the court settles in Heian, and you feel the move like a deep breath taken after a long walk, a promise that rule will now sit with clarity and grace. You pass through corridors where polished floors hold the morning like still water. Tatami smells of rush and sun. Screens unfold in soft hinges and show mountains wrapped in cloud. A servant places a silver ladle beside a bowl of pure water. Incense warms in a small cup and releases a line that climbs toward the rafters, then loosens into the open air. The palace spreads in wings around a grand court where officials stand by rank and color. Sleeves touch stone with a whisper. Fans rise. The hour turns. Order grows from steady gesture rather than force. On the northern hills, a monastery crowns a long ridge. Bells roll down the slopes and touch the city like distant thunder softened by pine needles. A learned monk named Saicho teaches a path that asks for diligence and mercy. Monks chant with voices that sound like wind walking through bamboo. Across the water, another master named Kukai returns with new texts and a way of thought that carries images as bright as sunrise. He climbs a mountain of cedars and builds halls where lanterns tremble and mandalas bloom like gardens of meaning. Pilgrims move between ridge and plain and learn that the mind can rest on quiet pictures, the way a bird rests on a branch after a long flight. In the South District estates open their gates to reveal gardens where gravel rakes into waves and islands of moss lift small trees like lanterns. Houses look inward across ponds where the moon will fall later and break into silver petals. You step over a plank bridge and enter a hall where a brush takes ink with a slight sound like a fish taking breath. The line flows across paper. The characters have the grace of reeds moving in water. A new way of writing joins the old one. Curved signs arise that match the sound of the language as it is spoken in halls and lanes. The hand that holds this brush belongs to a lady of the court, and you watch how fine syllables make room for feelings that move like quiet tides through the day. At a poetry contest, lanterns are lit while the last orange leaves float in a slow circle on the pond. A judge listens with a face as clear as a mirror. Poems arrive like folded cranes, small and exact. A sleeve brushes a sleeve, and the faint sound tells a story as surely as a line of ink. Colors layer in robes until the room seems to hold a garden within its silk. One robe answers the plum, and another answers the willow. The art lies in match and echo, in a chord between seeing and feeling that people call a gentle sadness at the passing world, a sweetness that makes the chest expand and the throat tighten. In a quiet gallery, a lady composes a long tale. She sets her paper by a lamp that trembles in light wind. Her brush carries a world of corridors, perfumes, festivals, vows, and lunar nights. She gives her prince rooms to walk and gives his heart rooms too. The tale holds the hush before a confession and the hush after a farewell. The rustle of bamboo blinds becomes a form of speech. You hear the court breathe along with the sentences. The book will pass into sleeves and then into chests carved with peonies. It will survive fires and floods and will still glow when the city has changed its houses and gates. Some late chapters feel as if another rhythm enters the page, like a second musician joining a song that began elsewhere, and the pages accept that mystery without the need for a single name. Towers of the palace rise with broad eaves that throw deep shade. Bridges curve like quiet smiles across narrow streams. The layout follows a plan that faces south and welcomes light. Yet the court does not simply copy distant models. Craftsmen let the grain of these islands speak. Columns sit on stones shaped to shed rain. Brackets lift like wings of herons that know when to stand and when to step. A night wind carries the soft tread of deer through a shrine grove at the edge of the avenues. The old reverence for river and peak continues beside the new halls of Sutra, and the city learns to hold both without strain. You walk at night along an arcade where lamps burn behind paper. A girl learns the game of incense. She names a blend with a poem of 3 lines, then hides a smile behind her fan. The room carries plum, aloe, and a trace of clove. Names pass from hand to hand the way shells passed in an older time by the shore. Certain recipes sleep now in houses that no longer stand, and their exact weight of fragrance has gone to ground with the cedar beams that once sheltered them. What remains is the memory of a room where friends could know each other by scent without a single word spoken. At a banquet, musicians lift flutes and strings while a dancer turns slowly on a lacquered floor. A phoenix spreads across the back of her robe. Servants bring trays of salted fish, mountain greens, and rice that shines like frost. A scribe at the edge of the hall writes a few lines to record the hour when the moon met the eve, and someone sang a verse that will be cherished in another generation. The great family that guides the court sits at ease. You see how grace and calculation share the same table, how marriage can carry policy, and how the deeper story of rule moves along corridors shielded by blinds of bamboo and silk. At the city's edge, farmers return from fields where irrigation channels run in straight lines like strings on a zither. A child lifts a basket of persimmons and laughs when one drops and does not break. The court shines in silk and ink, yet the city listens for the steps of those who feed it. On certain days, officials carry rice to granaries with solemn care. At shrines on small hills, people set simple offerings and bow for safe weather and gentle harvests. A long net keeps city and countryside within one circle, delicate yet strong. You walk a covered gallery during rain, and the world looks like a painting, every distance misted to a soft edge. Calligraphy dries on racks. A small gong calls people to a reading. A monk opens a scroll and the room stills. The characters flow like a narrow river through a gorge of time. Outside, the rain draws silver cords from eave to stone and turns the courtyard into a quiet instrument. The page you read and the sound you hear seem to rise from one source. By late evening, the court cools to a hush. Screens close, lamps are trimmed. In one chamber, a tired scribe rubs his eyes and writes the date with a small flourish. In another, a young poet looks through a lattice at the moon, then lowers her gaze and chooses an image that will carry a feeling across years. Somewhere beyond the last gate, a messenger rides with quiet urgency along a dark road. The shape of the land begins to change as estates spread and leaders beyond the capital learn the taste of power. For now, the city of ink and silk holds the hour. A crane lifts from a pond inside a garden where a single maple keeps its color into winter. You stand and take in the full chord of this age. The sure facts rest in the move to Heian, in the rise of great temples on the hills, in the flowering of Kana that opens the way for women to write with a new freedom, and in the tale that paints a whole society in rooms of moonlight and perfume. The gentle uncertainty lingers in the making of certain pages and in recipes of incense stored in houses that fell long ago. The night deepens. A bell touches the air. Ink dries. The city sleeps with one eye open, watching its reflection in the canal, while the first soft hoofbeats of a different order sound far away. You arrive at a narrow beach where pebbles sing under the tide, and banners wheel like gulls along the headland. The cloth carries white circles and scarlet suns. Riders gather reins and lift their voices to a rhythm older than drums. Salt dries on lacquer, and the smell of sweat mixes with pine. The world has turned from perfumes and poems to armor that fits like a second skin. You feel lamellar plates settle on your shoulders, cords firm across your chest, iron cool along your forearm, and the horse beneath you breathes like a bellows warming for work. Inland, courtiers still write by lamplight, yet the sound that steers the future now rings on wooden bridges and river fords. Clans knot their oaths with silk and speak promises before shrine ropes, where white paper whispers in wind. Armor glints along mountain paths. Messengers lean forward in the saddle, with eyes set on the next ridge, then the next again. Names move through the air like weather, carrying old grudges, sudden mercies, and the weight of long loyalties given and withdrawn. You follow a road to a harbor where ships rock on short chains. A row of crimson banners waits offshore. On the pebbled slope, a boy sets a fan on a pole at the edge of the surf. It shines like a small moon. An archer kneels and draws the cord to his ear. The arrow leaves with a sound like a plucked string and crosses the water to strike the fan with a clean clap. The crowd breathes as one, then releases its breath in a wave that rolls along the shore. In the evening, a blind singer lifts a lute and carries the moment into song, and the water seems to remember each note with a faint silver shiver. At dawn, you climb the old road toward a city that once held the gaze of the whole realm. Processions flood the avenues. Smoke rises at noon and spreads like gray water across the sky. By night, the glow carries the shape of roofs. Heat prints itself on skin. Bells lie broken on stone. Statues sit black with soot, then return to gold when rain begins and washes their faces. Memory holds the burning close, then keeps the rebuilding close beside it, because grief and resolve drink from the same bowl and pass the cup between them. Word runs along the coast that white banners gather near the narrow strait where tides twist like ropes of light. You ride through wind that smells of salt and mugwort. Across the water, cliffs break into shelves of seagrass and kelp. Oars lift and fall. Voices carry like lines thrown from deck to deck. On a high platform, a general raises his hand, and the ships turn as if tied to one star. The current slides beneath hulls with patient strength. A battle begins and ends on that water, a field made of waves where courage shows itself by turning with the tide at the right heartbeat, or by holding against it when holding seems impossible. The shore grows still after the last shout fades. You feel the pull of change go out with the tide. A house that ruled behind screens of bamboo and silk comes to terms with command that rides boots and stirrups. From the east, a warrior gathers allies and builds a seat of power that faces the ocean rather than a palace gate. The town lies behind a belt of pines. Streets smell of fish, salt, and new timber. Offices rise with simple strength, square rooms set for work more than display. A bell from a hillside hall travels across that plain speech and gives the place a clean edge of calm. He sits not in brocade but in armor set aside, the laces still salty from a ride. He speaks of keeping order through posts in provinces, officers who steady bridges and storehouses, men who answer to a center that trusts and watches in equal measure. The titles sound like tools shaped for exact work. A shugo holds a province with a measured voice. A jito keeps a manor upright, counts harvests, settles quarrels over ditches and paths. Grain moves where it is needed. Horses are tallied with care. Roads learn the habit of patrols. The realm begins to feel the weight of a hand that is firm without noise. From this new center, the road reaches villages that once lived in a haze of far rumor. A sheriff arrives with a small retinue. He checks the ferry and sets a schedule so traders can cross without fear. He names a keeper for a storehouse and another for a ford. He collects rice for the levy, then leaves enough for a winter that might come lean. He rides on without display and leaves a track of order. People keep their songs and festivals, yet the country learns to move by a clock that follows hoofbeats and posts instead of distant wishes. In a quiet quarter, a woman shaves her head and wraps her body in plain cloth. Her voice stays steady when men quarrel. They call her Mother of the Warrior House. She writes letters that carry more weight than armor. She refuses to let sons treat the realm as a toy and stands by a gate until a promise is spoken that binds the house for another season. Strength wears prayer beads and still decides the line between peace and disorder. When she enters a room, the air remembers its shape, and the city remembers how to breathe. You enter a temple near the new capital where monks sit in rows as light falls through high windows and turns the floor into a pale lake. A single bell opens the air. A teacher speaks about posture and breath, about seeing thoughts rise and pass like fish that show their backs and vanish again. Warriors kneel on mats that smell of straw and watch themselves watching. In the field, a person cannot choose the hour or the weather, yet can choose the angle of the mind, and this practice steadies that choice. A courtyard pine leans just so, and the lean teaches more than an afternoon of words. You stop by a forge where a smith draws a blade from orange light and lays it on an anvil that sings. He shapes a curve that rests easy in the hand and gives the edge a line that looks like a wave held just before it breaks. He quenches the steel and vapor coils around his wrists. The air smells faintly sweet under the smoke, as if a tea chest were open nearby. He polishes until a landscape appears inside the metal, a misted ridge no cartographer could draw. A round guard plate sits ready, black as a pond at night, and his thumb finds the balance without looking. Songs about these years travel with men who carry lutes along ferry routes. They sit on mats near lantern light and pour memory into sound. A single line rises again and again, a phrase that likens the world to dew on grass, bright and brief. The songs carry names of brothers who chose different masters and met at a ford when the air smelled of mint. They carry the image of a swift prince who leapt a gate with a fan in his teeth and rode north under winter moons until the line of his trail thinned into frost and story. In the afternoon, you walk a row of pines above a rocky beach. The sea sounds like a kettle set to a calm boil. A man practices drawing his sword and returning it to the sheath in one smooth breath. He moves until the sound of steel at the mouth of the scabbard becomes soft, almost kind. A boy watches, then bows, and begins again after a mistake without complaint. Nearby, a small hall keeps a house code with clear sentences about duty to lord, duty to parent, and duty to the straightness of the self. The letters are spare and strong, the kind of letters that improve a man the way a whetstone improves a blade. Evening settles over the town by the sea. Lanterns hang from eaves. The smell of grilled fish rises in a thin line of smoke. A patrol crosses a bridge and nods to a merchant who rolls his shutters closed. The ruler sits in a plain room and signs a tablet that confirms a post for a man in a far valley. He places the tablet in a box and closes the lid with quiet care. Outside, a bell from the hillside temple sends a calm circle through the dark, and the tide answers with its old breath, steady as sleep. Before rest, you return to the shore. Foam licks the stones. A scrap of lacquer floats in, turns, and slides away. The sure fact rests in the rise of rule from Kamakura near the end of the 12th century, a government that placed warriors at the center and set Shugo and Jito across the provinces to keep order from bridge to granary. Records of appointments and levies remain as firm as iron. The open thread moves with the tide, carried by the lives of a woman whose valor steps in and out of the page like someone passing behind a screen, and by a prince whose last steps in the north keep their hush. You let the hush stand, then breathe with the sea, and feel the islands gather for storms that ride across water with drums in their bellies. You stand at the lip of Hakata Bay as low light fills the ripples with pewter. The tide slides over stones with a hush that steadies the chest. Fishermen coil ropes and listen. Pine needles hold little beads of night water. Far off, a bell from a hillside hall skims the air and comes to rest at your feet like a thin coin of sound. On the sand, a line of posts rises shoulder to shoulder. Shovels bite the shore. Carts bring stone. Men with calloused hands set blocks in a careful seam and pack earth behind them until the face looks like a clean cliff grown from the beach. A wooden palisade braces the wall where the water bites hardest. Sweat beads on brows and dries white with salt. This work does not call attention to itself. It takes the shape of duty and keeps going. News has traveled with the seabirds for years. Riders from the court carry letters that speak in firm lines. Envoys arrive by small boats and climb a narrow stair, their garments heavy with spray. They are given a quiet room. Tea is poured. Words are weighed. A reply declines submission. Another party lands and does not leave. Swords take the last word, and wind carries that silence across the bay. The shore learns to watch the horizon with a calm face and a ready hand. In the autumn of 1274, you spot the first long row of dark hulls cresting the line between cloud and water. The ships carry men from many shores. Drums sound like echoing heartbeats. Arrows lift and fall. The air tastes of salt and iron. You stand on tamped earth behind the new wall, while bows hum in a steady chant and spears test the gaps where waves push and pull. The palisade holds. The stone face holds. The defenders work in teams and answer with short calls that settle the nerves. In the night, a glow gathers on the water beyond the surf and climbs into the clouds. Morning shows wreckage scattered along the strand, broken masts and jars of water and coils of line. Bodies are lifted with the care given to any traveler who reaches land. The bay breathes again, slow and cool. Along the roads, carpenters pack tools and travel to the coast. Masons bring plumb lines and strings darkened with charcoal. The wall lengthens and learns the curve of the bay. Its skin shows a pattern like scales that drink the sun and shed the rain. Children carry baskets of pebbles and learn how a shore becomes a shield. At shrines near the dunes, ropes of rice straw lift white paper that shivers in the sea wind. A cup of clear water rests at each gate, and a sprig of evergreen leans against a stone, a small promise that all this labor will belong to more than fear. Songs carry through the lanes about men who take small boats out under stars to slip among anchored ships. Oars dip without splash, hooks find rope, torches strike like short suns then drop into the black. The stories soften the edges of night and turn fear into a plan. You watch one crew push off at dusk. They vanish inside a traveling dark and return before dawn with smoke woven through their hair. They bow at the shrine on the way to sleep. The keeper sets one more ladle of water outside the gate, as thanks to courage that stays humble. Years turn. The wall grows higher. Lanes behind it learn to move around carts and crews. Mothers carry fish and greens home past piles of stone. Monks in travel cloaks bless the hands that lift blocks. A painter in service to a small lord kneels on reed mats and begins to fix these days on long rolls of paper. He draws the curve of the bay and a horse that rears, and the white spread of oars in moonlight. He copies the faces of men who are easy to forget when drums are quiet and surf covers the prints. The roll will coil and uncoil through many winters. It will carry the smell of ink and the sound of a bowstring into rooms where children learn what was endured. In high summer of 1281, the horizon darkens again. The line of hulls looks endless. Wind bells in the town tangle their thin voices. Priests lift sutras at dawn. Archers test their strings in the shade. The wall is ready. Its top holds baskets of stones and jars of water and bundles of extra arrows. The first boats push close and strike the surf. Ladders rise and meet edges of timber. Hands push them back. The stallions of iron sing and bite. Warriors drop into the foam and rise again. Night comes with a heavy breath and does not let the wind rest. Clouds thicken above the black water. The smell of rain moves in waves before the rain itself. You sit with armor loosened and watch the first drops darken the dust. They fall like seeds. In a breath, the rhythm changes. Ropes creak. Lanterns vanish. Ships swing on their anchors and then break free. A sound rises from the water that has no shape. It belongs to wind that takes the whole bay in its hands and squeezes until the sand flies and the palms lie flat. Men find each other by touch and prayer. The wall holds against the surge. Torches gutter then flare again. Dawn arrives with a cold face and shows the shore thick with debris tangled in eelgrass. Planks cover the rocks like fallen leaves. Masts lie across the sand like stripped trees. Survivors lift their heads and drink from bowls that tremble on the lip. The sun warms skin that cannot stop shivering. The tide carries the rest of the story away. In the weeks that follow, the town does not boast. The wall receives repairs. The palisade is set straight again. A roll of paper grows longer with new scenes of small boats and close combat and wind that looks like ink streaming from the brush. At Yusa and other halls of Hachiman, offerings of rice and sake stand beside boughs of cypress. A priest speaks a short prayer that feels older than weather. People begin to call the storm divine, not to claim a private favor, but to name what felt beyond their strength. The word folds itself around humility and steadiness, and the sense that craft and courage met a gift they could not command. You walk the beach at low tide and pick up a shard of fired clay blackened on the rim. It smells faintly of old smoke when rain touches it. Years from now, divers will lift bell-shaped shells of iron from a seabed that holds anchors and bowls and roof tiles. The iron will show how a flower of fire once opened above a deck and turned midnight into noon. That later finding will add a new thread to the cloth already woven by the painter's hand and by the wall that still stands with its quiet face to the sea. The shore learns a lesson it keeps for lifetimes. Walls with good foundations matter as much as drums and songs. Boats that move in silence can steer a night. A community that trains together and prays together holds longer when wind presses on the gate. The sure facts settle like sand in a jar. 2 invasions reach the islands in 1274 and in 1281. Hakata raises a long wall of stone and wood that catches ladders and denies a landing. Small boats carry raids into anchorages. A storm tears fleets apart and leaves the bay strewn with timbers. The remaining thread lives on the water. How much of safety belongs to wind, and how much to hands that lifted stones and bows stays in gentle shadow. The waves keep the measure and the wall keeps the line. You breathe with both, and the coast grows quiet again under a sky brushed clean by salt. You step into streets that carry the hush of ash. Courtyards open to squares of raked gravel. Fireweed rises where walls once stood. The city wears scars with a kind of patience and begins to seed beauty in the gaps. A bell from a riverside hall draws a thin circle through the morning. Across the water, a pavilion lifts toward the hills with the poise of a heron. Cypress bark shingles hold the light. Tatami breathe a dry scent. A stream whispers under stepping stones and folds the sound into a garden that prefers stones to flowers. You climb a quiet stair and look down on sand drawn into waves that never break. The place invites a way of seeing that loves restraint more than display. You bow to the room and feel your pulse slow to match its careful lines. The shogun who tends this retreat loves poems and lacquer and the soft speak of tea. In the afternoons, he sits in a small room and listens to water pour from bamboo into a basin, as if the mountain were sending messages in little syllables. Friends gather with sleeves in pale colors and share cups that fit the palm as if shaped by river stones. An elder pours from a kettle that sings just below a boil, and the steam smells faintly of straw and smoke. The chashitsu folds the world into a space where the rough and the refined find a single note. A cracked glaze becomes a teacher. A bamboo scoop becomes a guide. You feel a philosophy arrive that prefers the quiet of old wood and the dignity of repaired edges. In a theater not far from the river, masks rest on stands like sleeping faces. A young actor rubs his hands with cedar and lifts a mask to the lamp. Shadows round the eyes. The mouth holds a calm that can turn sorrow and joy with a breath. On stage, a flute writes a silver line in the air, and drums answer with low thunder. A man in a robe the color of crow feathers steps into the light and moves with an economy that feels like prayer. Words emerge in syllables that ride music and silence in equal measure. A patron in a gold robe once sat in this hall and learned how a gesture can carry whole histories. Names like Kanami and Zimi still stand quietly at the edge of the stage when the last note fades. Ink painters lay paper on the floor and kneel with sleeves tied back. One travels across the sea and returns with wrists trained to hold mountains inside two colors. Pines step down a ridge. A river unfurls like silk. Empty space works as hard as ink, and the page becomes a landscape where the eye can walk for a long time without leaving the room. The same love of austerity arranges stones at a temple on the north side. 15 boulders take their places among small seas of white gravel. Yet no matter where you sit, one stone slips from sight and keeps the count just short of complete. The pattern feels like a lesson about the world and about the self, though the mind has no need to pin it down. The garden holds its silence, and the origin of its design rests there as well. Trade routes breathe even while the capital mends. Tallies pass between harbors and distant courts. Junks ride in on winter monsoon and bring silk that shines like frost and ceramics that ring when tapped. They ride out on summer wind with copper and fans, and a taste for poetry that travels as easily as spice. Pirates find chances between the seasons and press small coasts with fast oars and short blades. Patrols gather at estuaries. Light towers burn on headlands when a stranger's sail crosses the line of the horizon. The sea teaches caution and exchange in the same hour. A ledger in a warehouse shows neat columns of cargo and a blank place where a payment left no mark and no memory except a smile and a cup of tea shared at dusk. The capital draws back its shoulders as a new hall rises east of the river. Screens show moonlit pines and a bridge that seems to carry a tune. The pavilion on the hill finds a companion in a pavilion on another hill. One glows with a gentle silver that belongs to water and cloud. The other reflects like calm fire. People murmur that one was meant to wear a skin of hammered leaf that never reached the rafters. The wooden skin remains unadorned and grows lovelier as rain and sun work their art. The rumor keeps its place at the edge of the garden like a bird that returns to the same branch every season. You cross lanes that smell of charcoal and wet soil. Carpenters fit beams where streets burned in earlier years. Shop signs carve characters into dark wood and hang them at shoulder height where hands can touch. Renga poets meet in narrow rooms and pass verses down the line until 100 links bind night to dawn. The final couplet lands like a boat touching shore. A sense of shared voice enters the house. In a side room, a tea bowl with a glaze that looks like winter sky shares the table with a rice scoop and a cracked vase that holds a single sprig of green. The dignity of enough becomes the center of the room. Then hooves and clatter return. The Onin years open like a fault in the ground. Brothers gather on opposed porches. Allies change with the wind. Roofs fall. Gardens drink ash. Bells ring over squares that have lost their corners. Lines of refugees move toward low hills with bundles balanced on poles. The city is not the only stage. Provinces feel a long looseness as local lords raise palisades, mint coins, and test the edge between duty and ambition. A drumbeat that once came from a central hall now sounds from many small keeps that lift along ridges. The air carries the metallic taste of a country learning to walk without a single hand on its shoulder. On a misted morning, you climb a path that cuts into the folds between provinces. Pines stand close. Footfalls stay soft. A hut shows on a shelf of land and vanishes when cloud moves. A courier lays a message in a hollow post and lifts another without speaking. Fires start on nights when no army is near. Gates open when no envoy is announced. Men move in small groups through cedar and bamboo and leave very little print. Manuals later speak of ash that blinds and crickets that whisper warnings and powders that turn torches to pools of fire. Names of districts are clear, while names of people fade to water. The hills keep their secrets, and the valleys accept the favor of open gates without asking for a face. By late afternoon, you stand in a garden where maples on a low island blaze in red and orange above a pond the color of old coins. A boy feeds carp that rise with little noises at the surface. A monk rakes gravel until the pattern holds a calm that survives a stray wind. The city hums again with markets and loots, yet a watchfulness remains like a second shadow under every eave. The pavilion that loves moonlight glows at the hour when the first star appears and the first brazier turns the room to amber. Its master grows old, while the town sharpens its sense for what endures. Night gathers. A no stage shines in lamplight. A chorus chants with voices that sit low in the body. The actor in the crane feather robe returns and lifts his arms so slowly that every person in the hall feels time pause. Outside, soldiers stack spears by a gate and tighten straps for a ride at dawn. The city has learned the costs of long conflict and the relief of short peace. Across the realm, new lords make gardens and cast bridges that look like poems in wood because the heart still needs gentleness, even when the hand must stay ready. You look back once more at the sand waves that never break, and the 15 stones that never fully reveal their number. The sure facts settle in the chest. The Onin conflict that begins in 1467 tears the capital for years and sends power outward to warlords who shape their provinces like self-contained worlds. In the midst of fracture, arts gather themselves with a new tenderness. The Silver Pavilion's retreat frames an age that loves restraint, while stages of no and scrolls of ink painting carry a language of shadow and light that still speaks with soft authority. The unanswered threads remain at the garden edge. The maker of the stone field keeps a quiet name. The plan to sheath a hall in silver lingers as rumor. The identities of hands that moved gates and lanterns in the night drift like fog between cedar trunks. You breathe with the pond and the distant drum and the city that now sleeps with one eye open. You climb a hill above a lake that holds the sky like a quiet mirror, and a keep rises with walls that catch the sun as if the day itself were a banner. Gates stand with iron studs that feel cool under your palm. Corridors smell of cypress and new lacquer. Screens open to show pines painted with strokes that seem to breathe. A lord of swift decision walks these floors with a mind that loves order and speed. He collects fine clocks and bright armor, then sends roads into provinces the way a carpenter sends straight lines into wood. The keep looks outward as if it were a lighthouse for a realm learning to pull its scattered lights into one flame. Down on the shore, long hulks anchor in the swell. Their sides are high. Ropes creak. Men with wool coats and beards step to the pier and lift chests bound with iron. A bell from their deck answers the bell from a shrine that faces the water. Sugar sits in cones like rock. Glass shines like captured rain. A small organ sighs when tried. A man in black speaks in careful syllables and offers a small book that smells of salt. You listen and hear a music that knows distant cities, and you hear a promise that walks in company with trade. A few lords study the book with a steady gaze. A few lift their hands for a blessing. Others study the ships and weigh them against old bonds and new plans. Screens in town will later show these arrivals as golden rivers of cloth and light that flow through corridors of painted pine. In a valley of long grass, you watch men take powder from gourd and pour it with care. Cords glow at the tips like small snakes of fire. The air smells of saltpeter and charcoal, and a hint of sulfur that clings to the tongue. Wooden racks are hammered into the ground. Palisades stand in a curve at the height of a horse's chest and the length of a line of archers. Hooves drum the earth. Riders lift spears. A shout runs the length of the fence, and then quiet falls. A quiet occupied by movement that repeats and repeats. Bite the powder, set the ball, lift the match, find the sight, touch the ember, feel the stock, let the breath go, and answer the charge with a flat crack that folds into smoke. The field fills with a white weather that knows no wind, and the day turns on a rhythm that belongs to patience as much as it belongs to powder. The victory enters song as a triumph of new tools. Yet the ground keeps its own memory of fences and timing and rain that lifted the grass just enough to slow hooves, and the exact share of what won the hour stays soft at the edges. Monks on a mountain above the capital hear a different message. Fires move through halls that once guarded a ridge with prayers as steady as stone. Cedar burns with a deep note that the wind carries to the next valley. Statues change color in heat and return to calm when ash settles. The new lord cuts through old power so the road forward holds fewer gates, and the smoke takes its place in the chest beside the clarity that a united land will need. Survivors carry a bell clapper and a scroll down the slope and lay them in a storehouse by a river. A child touches the split wood with 2 fingers and learns what ambition sounds like when it meets old sanctuaries. The keep on the lake gathers scholars, swordsmen, and painters. A room opens where the walls shimmer with gold leaf so that the late sun looks like a slow storm of light. A folding screen shows tigers that seem to blink. A screen in another room shows foreigners with high noses and long coats walking under banners and clouds. The city below learns to taste a new drink that comes brown and hot and draws a line through the afternoon. Another house near the castle holds a room no wider than 4 mats where a kettle hangs above a small hearth. The host wipes a bowl with a cloth the color of quiet rain, scoops powder the color of hill moss, lifts water until it sings, and turns a wrist with a grace that looks like nothing and feels like everything. The rough lip of the bowl meets the guest with a humble truth. In that small room, power remembers to bow to restraint, and luxury remembers to bow to need. Along trade roads, a hymn rises in a village at dusk. A bell from a new chapel answers a drum from an old shrine. A lord in the west opens a hall where a cross stands beside a screen of bamboo. Another lord closes one and sends the men in black to a ship with a letter that speaks clearly and asks that no more arrive. The same ruler who loves tea in carpenter's squares also reads reports that show how belief can become a banner. He lets merchants remain and lets ships return with their pepper and silk, yet he narrows the path for those who would sow a faith that answers to a distant shepherd. The night accepts both the hymn and the old chant, and the shore accepts both the black hulls and the small fishing boats that fold and unfold the sea. Summer comes with hard blue sky. A lord wraps a fan in his sleeve and enters a temple in the capital for a night of rest on his way to a hunt. Servants stack helms in a row. Horses stamp in the lane in quiet. At first light, men in ash-colored jackets move through the gates with a stride that has no wasted step. Smoke and shouts rise as if from under the floor. The tiles crack in heat and fall like black leaves. A small drum thumps through the quarter. The lord stands in a room where paintings of pines hold their calm while the walls glow. He looks toward the lake that once showed him his dream. He turns inward. The blaze takes the rest. The morning that follows carries reports along every road, and each report walks with an unanswered companion. The reason that set that hand to such haste remains in partial shadow. You ride behind a general who hears the news before the dust settles. He turns in a field near a low ridge and sends his men on a forced march that lifts thunder from the road. River stones ring under hooves at the ford. Smoke lies over a village like cloth laid to dry. At the foot of a hill, a stream runs clear. The army drinks without speaking, then climbs. A battle meets them and flows away. The man who lit the temple ash falls in a ditch of reeds within days, a speed that feels like a judgment carried by the land itself. The general who turned so quickly now gathers allies and lifts his headquarters in a city that sits between river mouths and sea. This new seat rises from a base of stones as large as houses. The wall fits them like a poem made of boulders. Turrets sit like white birds along the corners. Inside, storehouses smell of rice and cedar. Officials carry tablets that list fields and households in clear lines. Men in straw hats set poles along paddies to measure what the earth can yield and how much each household owes in grain. A decree invites swords to leave warrior hands and climb into storehouses where they rest on racks in long, patient rows. Farmers keep hoes and sickles. Fighters keep service, but lose the comfort of steel at their belts in the market. The city hums with carpenters, scribes, tea-men, and armorers who now shape fittings that please the eye rather than the field. At the docks, merchants unload bales of cloth and jars of oil. A man with a crucifix stitched inside his sleeve prays in silence, then lifts a bale and walks into a town that understands the price of silk and the weight of paper more easily than it understands the soul of a far shepherd. A notice on a gate asks teachers of the new creed to leave in peace. Another notice allows the ships to bring pepper and sugar when winds are right. Harmony rests on lines that try to split trade from creed, and the line trembles each season. Night returns to the lake where the first keep rose and met the sun. The foundations sit in grass now, stones that remember footsteps and plans that once flowed through a hall of gold. A heron lifts slowly and crosses the water. You stand on the shore and feel how force and refinement walk together in these years. The sure facts settle without effort. Matchlocks reach the islands and take root. A field near a river bends toward the new rhythm of volleys and fences and turns a war that once belonged to arrows and charges. A temple burns on a mountain because a new order will not share the road. A keep at Honoji falls at dawn in fire and smoke, and its fall opens the gate for a man of humble birth who gathers the realm and plants a citadel above a river of trade. The thread that stays unbound lies in a room where reason keeps its counsel, and in a field where patience and powder shared the victory and left the final balance of credit to the silence of grass. You breathe with that silence, and the road ahead points toward a long peace made of rules and roads and steady footsteps. You arrive on a road that runs straight as a string toward a city of water and tile. Pines stand at measured intervals and mileposts sit like quiet stones that keep count without complaint. Pack horses ring their bells and merchants call the names of inns where steam rises from iron kettles. A gate appears where the great highways gather like fingers meeting a palm. You pass through and feel an order settle around you. An order that prefers long peace to quick glory, and writes its will in roads and timetables, in ferry schedules and storehouse keys handed to careful hands. The river carries barges under low arches. Warehouses smell of rice and cedar. Above them, a hill of white walls and blue-gray roofs climbs like a deliberate wave in the center of the plain. Within that circle, a ruler studies a map that ties provinces to the capital by cords of duty and time. Lords travel by schedule and leave their households as pledge and bond. Files of retainers cross passes with the calm of men who know the day of their return. The custom of alternate attendance is set in firm words in 1635, and from that year the highways beat like steady arteries that keep the country's rhythm even when storms gather at sea. You walk an avenue where the scent of soy and charcoal gathers in windows. A brushmaker sets out bundles that shine with the oil of deer hair. A bookshop opens its shutters and stacks volumes wrapped in indigo paper. Porters rest on low stools and drink tea from cups that warm the palm. The crowd moves with a patience that belongs to streets used every day by men and women who expect tomorrow to look much like today. Peace finds a home in habit. Habit builds a city that grows like a forest that loses no leaves. You turn into a lane that leads to a quarter lit by lanterns with red cords. Shamisen draw thin silver lines over the murmur of voices. A curtain of reeds parts and closes. A face meets yours for a breath, then vanishes into a room where light turns hair to lacquer and silk to water. Here the world floats just above the stones. Carvers cut planks in a back workshop and lift prints that glow with vermilion and ash black. A courtesan looks over her shoulder with quiet wit. A wrestler ties his belt with a slow breath. A fireman holds a hook pole like a staff of office. The city copies itself on paper and sends its images along the roads with the ease of river drift. On another street, a stage opens to late light. Drums begin with a heartbeat and flutes thread the air. A boy dances in a robe that catches the breeze like a sail. He turns and becomes a girl whose sleeves speak where words would stumble. Kabuki finds its step and carries crowds that want to laugh and and watch courage change its clothes and keep its face. Not far away, puppeteers lift tall figures above a small sea of heads. Strings sleep while rods do the work. A chanter leans into his lines until a storm moves across the room and a lull after rain settles into the same room without a single drop falling. You follow a low canal where willows comb the water. Shop signs hang at shoulder height and tell their stories in careful strokes. A papermaker skims pulp and lifts a sheet that catches the sun like frost. A knife grinder sings to his stone. In a school behind a temple, small hands trace characters on tablets, and a teacher nods with a kindness that feels earned. The number of people who can read climbs like ivy up the walls of the city and into the side lanes of villages. Sermons, stories, notices, and travel guides ride in sleeves and baskets, and make the country feel smaller, in a way that does not press. On a spring morning, you reach the bank of the Sumida, just as petals begin to fall. Boats slide under clouds of blossom. Hawkers call for grilled eel. Stalls lay out cakes brushed with a shine like lacquer. A print seller fans his stock so images flash one after another. Bridges in rain, travelers on a pass under a round moon. A wave that reaches for the sky as if a hand were making a vow. You lift a sheet and feel the grain of the plank in the paper. The line between the daily street and the picture on the page thins until the same breeze seems to move both. Far to the west, a small island sits in a harbor that smells of salt and tar. A low bridge ties it to a city of hills. The houses on the island look inward, and the gate keeps careful count. A book of medicine crosses that bridge in one season. A box with lenses in another. Seeds that make a new flower in a third. A shell from a distant coast rests in a cabinet and waits for a name in neat script. A physician learns to cut a model of the body and to listen for a pulse with an ear trained by foreign charts. A scholar copies a diagram of the heavens and then steps outside to check the night with his own eyes. The island stays small and the gate stays firm. Yet knowledge slips across like water through reeds and finds rooms ready for it. You visit a shrine grove near the castle. The ropes are thick, and the bells are deep. Paper strips lift and fall in the breeze. You rinse your hands at a basin and feel cedar cool your skin. Across town, a hall of learning lays out rules with clean edges. Men of office read lines that promise reward for careful duty and correction for careless hands. Confucian habit moves through classrooms and into farm villages, where headmen keep registers and levy canals. Order grows like rice in a well-tended paddy, and the year feels straight when the water keeps to its channels. Fire finds the city one winter when wind runs with it. Roofs crack and tiles fall. Smoke wraps the river until oarsmen take their bearings by the feel of current alone. When ash settles, streets realign and canals widen. Fire breaks become gardens and shrines move to corners where water runs near. The city learns to keep buckets filled and ladders ready. At night, a bellman walks with a clapper, and the sound makes a net that holds worry at the edge of sleep. The memory of that long burning lingers like a faint taste of smoke and tea. You sleep in an inn where the floor smells of straw and the pillow holds buckwheat husks. A maid slides the door with a touch that makes no sound. In the morning, you step onto the road where milestones tell how far it is to the next post town. You pass porters who carry crates tied with straw. You pass a procession that moves like a bright snake under hats of shallow bamboo. The rule of travel has turned the realm into a longhouse, each post town a room where soup steams and bedding shakes in the sun, and the stamp of a seal proves a duty met. In a quiet quarter, a poet ties his straw sandals and sets out with a pack and a paper hat. He crosses passes where pines write vertical lines against a pale sky. He sleeps in huts that hold the smell of smoke long after the fire dies. He sends small poems home like folded leaves that carry dew. A moon over a narrow river. A crow on a bare branch at dusk. A road that runs out of view behind a rock the size of a small house. His travel teaches the city to look outward again through windows no wider than a hand and to find whole landscapes in a few sounds. Years stack like rice in a storehouse. Now and then a law tries to turn taste toward thrift and away from bright display. Luxury quiets for a season and then returns in another room with another face. Grain prices climb and fall with weather and freight. The ruler weighs reform and revenue with a care that belongs to a man who knows both the patience of rule and the impatience of hunger. Peace holds through all of it, and the city keeps its habit of waking at dawn to the call of peddlers and sleeping to the last ferry bell that crosses the dark like a slow star. By twilight, you stand on a span of wood that looks toward the bay. Lanterns move on boats like soft constellations. A gust lifts the smell of tide and soy. Somewhere a print block waits for a carver to cut the last fine line along the edge of a wave. Somewhere a scholar opens a Dutch book and writes a note that turns from foreign letters into local ones halfway through the sentence. The sure fact rests in the long peace that begins in the early 17th century and in the Edict of 1635 that sets alternate attendance in motion so firmly that roads and towns reshape themselves to its measure. The open thread remains in the border between closure and contact, a line that refuses a single stroke since the word closed sits oddly beside the quiet traffic of books, instruments, and seeds that pass through a little island gate and find their way into minds prepared to receive them. Night settles over tile and canal and bridge, and the city sleeps with a calm that stores strength for the turn that waits beyond the horizon. Morning mist lifts from the bay and a shape moves across the water that does not belong to oar or sail. Smoke rises from tall pipes. A whistle cuts the air with a note like iron singing. Black hulls slide into view and lie at anchor, while gulls turn in uneasy circles. You stand on a headland and watch ripples spread from the paddles in perfect beats. Out on the decks, men in blue coats walk with a stride that speaks of clocks. Flags lift and settle. Cannons blink in the sun. The shore holds still, the way a deer holds still when a new scent reaches the grove. The city gathers at windows and along parapets. The old rhythm of tides has gained a new voice, and it will keep speaking after these ships leave the bay. Courtyards fill with hurried voices. A gate opens to a reception room that smells of lacquer and salt. Interpreters lean close over small tables and write neat lines. Gifts are set in careful balance with replies. The visitor asks that ports open and that sailors be protected, and the request carries the weight of a demand wrapped in courtesy. A treaty follows in a handful of years, plain on paper and heavy on the tongue. Warehouses near the docks begin to hold goods with strange names. The lanes near the water learn words that feel like pebbles in the mouth. News travels up river roads faster than usual. The city seems to grip its own hand to steady itself. Night streets in the old capital flicker with lanterns that throw long shadows on stone. Young men in dark cloaks move with quick steps and leave the smell of oil and rain behind them. Slogans pass from mouth to mouth in whispers. A call to honor the throne and purge what is seen as weakness. Patrols pace the alleys. Steel flashes and is gone. A squad of swordsmen keeps order in a quarter of inns and tea houses and writes reports with a firmness that hides its worry. Behind screens, elders measure risk with rice grains and decide who rides at dawn. Winter settles over a river city where warehouses wear frost like thin glass. A messenger bows low before a house of scholars. He carries names of provinces that wish to rise in concert and deliver the realm to a single son rather than two. Banners gather on roads that run from hill to bay. A white flag with a crimson circle meets a brocade standard in a tense stillness. A battle begins and flows along a line of rivers and palisades. In one city, a wise head of the old guard meets a man of the new in a small room that smells of ink and tea, and their calm words lead to a surrender that keeps the streets from turning into a red canal. The castle opens its gates. The city gains a new name that means Eastern Capital, and a line of travel shifts from one palace to another. The old era folds like a robe and is placed on a chest. The new era lifts a sleeve and begins. In the first spring of change, a scroll is read in a hall with white gravel and young pines. The vow promises assemblies, knowledge sought throughout the world, and a path free of narrow customs. A stillness follows the last word, then a long exhale. The scroll returns to its box, yet its breath keeps moving along roads and canals, and the steps of men with ledgers and rulers. A ship leaves for far coasts carrying a mission that will spend years counting factories and schools, parliaments and prisons, and will return with trunks full of books and new measurements for maps and calendars. The old domains disappear in a summer of announcements. Governors replace lords. Banners come down and flags of uniform size go up on new offices that smell of fresh cedar. Districts are measured with poles and chains. A standard coin rings on counters with a crisp note. The post rider carries letters under a new seal. Telegraph lines climb poles and hum like singing wire. Along the coast, a railway ties one port to a station that spills steam into the morning and lifts people who have never known speed beyond a gallop into a motion that makes fields blur. Schoolhouses open with gongs that call children in pairs to benches. Readers stack on shelves. Slates shine. A teacher lifts chalk and writes the order of the day. You watch a young man stand before a mirror while a barber takes hold of his topknot. The braid that has carried identity for generations falls to the floor like a snake uncoiled and rests there without movement. He runs a hand over his neck and looks stunned by a wind that does not blow. Clothiers cut jackets from dark wool. Tailors fit trousers. Officers learn tactics set down in neat lines in a foreign language, then repeat them in their own until the movements feel like the turning of a wheel that needs no voice to guide it. A drum calls youths from farm valleys and fishing coves to barracks where boots learn to beat time on packed earth. In a mill by a river, a line of girls reels silk from steaming basins while a whistle marks the hours. The workroom smells of wet cocoons and wood smoke. A forewoman taps a ruler on a table, and the rhythm steadies. At dusk, the girls walk home along a path lined with mulberry and talk about brothers in uniform and new posters in the village that show a black engine pulling bright carriages. A district near the palace burns, and when it rises again, it rises in brick and glass with gas lamps that wear milky globes. A ballroom opens where dancers circle under crystal, and newspapers write about evenings that smell of cologne and bunting and the first hesitant steps of a waltz. In rooms not far away, writers set their pens against excess and ask for thrift and dignity instead of glitter. The city learns to hold both faces for a while. Speeches fill assembly halls in provinces where farmers sit on planks and listen with slow nods. A leader of stout heart speaks of rights with a voice that reaches the back row. He travels with a cane and a conviction that refuses to bend. Pamphlets pass from hand to hand. Signatures gather like swallows on a line. Petitioners ask for a chamber where law can be spoken in the open. The request does not vanish. It moves like a steady river into a channel marked by a new constitution, read before a crowd that breathes as one on a cold day. The year turns, and the first diet seats its members on polished benches. The hall smells of ink and human hope. Not all paths run straight. A council erupts over a plan to send soldiers across the sea and shakes comrades who ate from the same bowl. Some resign and return to the provinces to speak in tents while rain hammers canvas. Years later, a rebellion burns in the south when men raised in a stricter code face a world where levy and ledger rule. Hills flash with gunfire. Villages bury knives. A statue will one day show a leader of that rising in the calm of his last decision, and people will look up and feel both pride and ache. The government holds the field and then presses ahead with rail and school and factory through the same valleys where smoke once hung heavy. A child holds a reader that opens with a hymn to the morning sun and to duty. He traces characters with a brush and turns the page carefully. A mother lifts a kettle in a kitchen lit by a narrow window and listens to a street vendor call his wares in a voice that blends old vowels with new. In the evening, a street lamp throws a warm circle that collects moths and conversations. Students argue about poetry and policy in a tea house where maps decorate the wall. A painter copies a foreign portrait and then paints a cedar grove with the same attention to light. You walk a riverbank at twilight. A train whistles beyond the willows. A school bell rings once and settles. The city breathes as if it has learned a new measure. The sure facts sit like stones placed with care. Steamers arrive in 1853 and treaties open ports. Armies march in a civil war that ends with the old capital spared and the realm gathered under a restored throne in 1868. The oath of that year sets a program that reaches from court to village. Domains become prefectures in 1871. The first railway carries passengers the following year. Conscription and land tax reform reshape duty and burden. A constitution is proclaimed in 1889 and a national assembly sits in 1890. The gentle uncertainty remains in the depth of change inside the hearts of those who bowed to the scroll and those who bowed to the whistle. Some promises may have guided policy more on paper than in kitchens, and some mercies in the Civil War may have risen from character as much as calculation. You let the river keep those measures. Night gathers, and the roads now head beyond the islands, towards seas where new victories and hard reckonings wait. Cymbals flash in noon light, and drums lift a city into one long breath. Flags ripple like bright fish along a river of shoulders. You stand at a curb while troops pass with boots that touch the stones as if counting them. The parade turns a recent victory into sound and color. Rifles lifted, bayonets wrapped, banners painted with suns that catch the eye and will not let go. Newspapers hang on strings outside stalls and snap in the breeze. A map in a window shows new lines drawn with tidy ink. A child holds a paper windmill that spins when the crowd claps, and the windmill becomes a lesson about pride that moves without words. Steel rails thread valleys toward ports where cranes now lift cargo with groans that echo against warehouses. Factories shake windows with steady breath, silk reels sing. Coal dust settles on sleeves and turns them a quiet gray. Ships leave with holds filled and return with machines that smell of oil and salt. A young officer studies charts with a ruler set square and writes in a hand that wastes no curve. The shore carries a feeling of reach, as if the islands have learned to lean forward without losing their footing. In schoolyards, the morning hymn rises while a portrait looks on with calm eyes, and a bell calls silence that settles like dew. Autumn fields rustle with rice. Villages sell grain to buy salt, kerosene, paper, and boots that last a season longer than the old kind. In towns, cafes open with striped awnings and small bands that lean into a gentle swing. A woman lifts a cup of coffee, and a man tries a hat with a brim that shadows his eyes in a daring way. The room smells of tobacco and varnish, and something sweet that does not belong to any harvest. A clerk in a gray suit folds a newspaper under his arm and talks about meetings in halls where men argue about rights and taxes and the speed of change. The words rise, then fall back into everyday chores, yet they leave a trace like chalk dust on the sleeve. A quiet afternoon turns. The ground begins to roll as if a wave had entered the earth. Roof tiles leap. A temple gate shudders and leans. Water in a basin climbs the side and spills in a circle that returns to the center. Streetcars throw sparks and jump their tracks. Smoke lifts in thin lines, then grows into walls. Wind finds the fire and makes it run. Bridges melt to black curves. The river seethes with boats that push and fall back. You taste ash and hear 1,000 voices become one long note that has no word inside it. Night arrives before it should. Houses fall in layers that sigh. A bell rings and stops in the middle of its tone. When dawn comes, it brings a silence that feels like snow, but is only dust and exhaustion. People line up for water with bowls that tremble. A flag rises over a school that has no windows and yet holds order like a lantern cupped in two hands. Weeks pass. Streets open again. Lines of soup form, then shorten. Children play among bricks that look like chess pieces on a board the size of a ward. A new plan spreads on tables in offices that smell of ink and smoke, and straight avenues take the place of lanes that wandered. The hurt remains like a bass note under everything, and the city learns to walk with it the way one learns to walk after a winter of illness, careful and grateful, and a little faster each day. A charred stone stands in a garden as a marker, and the moss around it grows thick as if to hold it safe. Far in the northeast, a railway runs through cold grass that rings under boots. A sudden blast tears a night open. Tracks twist. Reports unfold with tidy words that sit straight on the page. Troops move as if they were already in the saddle before anyone spoke. A new state rises in winter air with banners that look crisp under frost. Trains run with soldiers who stare at their reflections in the window and see both resolve and a question that refuses to speak its name. Shrines along the route receive offerings of rice and salt. The scent of pine has more weight when a rifle leans against a post. Markets shout again. Woman and man bring home enamel bowls, a radio with a dial that glows like a small moon, a lamp with a shade that throws gentle patterns on the ceiling. The radio sings marches at dawn, folk songs at noon, and news in a voice that never shakes. In classrooms, a line is traced on a map with a pointer that taps the board softly and holds a line along a river no one in the room has seen. Mothers fold white sashes and place them in drawers with care. At shrines, ropes heavy with paper strips hang still while a breeze moves only the edges. In winter, a crowd gathers at a station. A train waits with steam that drifts along the platform as if thinking things over. Soldiers in caps lean from windows while hands lift from the platform like a field of grass moving all at once. A woman passes rice balls wrapped in leaves through a window and turns away quickly so no one sees her mouth tremble. A boy raises a paper flag, lowers it, then raises it again with his jaw set. The whistle sounds and makes the air feel thin. The train slides out and takes a piece of the town with it, a piece that lingers in the station air long after the wagons vanish. A bridge outside a northern gate becomes a hinge. Shots crack like breaking bamboo. Floodlights swing. Dust rises in a white veil and clings to branches. Columns move along roads lined with pagoda trees. Cities by a great river turn their faces toward grief and then toward hard duty. A calendar changes its voice. At home, women carry bundles to market and return with coupons and rice that must stretch. A ration office smells of paper and raincoats. Children collect scrap and line up to sing in a clear pitch that climbs above the smoke of small factories. Public squares fill with speeches about unity and patience. The crowd nods, while a drummer taps a cadence that feels both firm and kind. A pact is signed in a hall with marble floors and chandeliers that copy stars. Cameras flash. Ink dries. Shoes click on stone. A seal leaves its mark. And a road that runs toward fire grows wider in a way that nobody admits out loud. Night drills darken a neighborhood. Curtains block every window. Candles burn with damp wicks and fill rooms with a sweet smoke that drifts into dreams. You walk through a barracks where boots sit in rows like sleeping animals. A manual lies open on a crate. The pages smell faintly of glue. A sergeant calls a number and voices answer from the diaphragm. Across town, a chamber receives a procession with solemn bows. Curtains part. A figure enters quietly and sits with the weight of ages resting in a single gaze. Offerings stand in neat order. Words are chosen with care. The city senses two centers of gravity in one sky. The wires between them hum, yet the sound does not tell how far one will pull against the other when the hour asks for a final choice. At dusk, you stop before a shop window where a kimono of indigo hangs beside a jacket cut like a uniform and a child's satchel made of stiff leather. The mix feels like a cord that contains both warmth and iron. You drink tea that tastes of barley and a trace of smoke. You hear feet drill beyond the wall at a steady pace. A festival still walks through streets in late summer with drums and lanterns that sway. A prayer still rises before harvest. The country holds both hand on plow and hand on rifle, while the horizon darkens to a blue that pushes the stars higher. The sure facts settle with the calm of stones in a stream. Victories across water lift pride and widen reach. The night of great shaking and fire in 1923 remakes the capital and leaves an ember that glows in memory. Lines are drawn on winter plains beyond the strait in the early 1930s, and a puppet crown sits on a new chair while trains run and flags lift in cold wind. The road bends again at a bridge near the northern gate in 1937, and armies move along a river that swallows years. A pact in 1940 binds fates in ink that darkens every corridor. The thread that will not lie flat rests between palace and barracks, inside rooms where curtained light and booted shadow share the same floor. How the final tug of that thread will play when storms reach full height remains veiled for one more night. Morning opens over a city of bricks, the color of dried blood. Walls stand without roofs. Rail lines end in a tangle that looks like roots pulled from earth. You walk along a canal where ashes have turned the banks pale and soft. A woman lifts a kettle over a charcoal brazier, and the thin smoke smells of tea and cinders. Children collect nails from the rubble and sort them by size in little piles. A bell from a temple that lost its hall lies on the ground like a fallen moon and still gives a low note when someone touches the rim. You feel how a nation learns to breathe again through small tasks and quiet vows that fit inside a single day. Down a street of makeshift stalls, a man ladles soup from a dented pot. Radios the size of bread loaves crackle with static, and a voice that chooses each word slowly. A paper lantern hangs at a doorway where people come to exchange buttons for rice and a spool of thread for a pair of socks. At night, the police whistle sounds and the lamps dim to small circles. A cart passes with sweet potatoes that smell like comfort when the city breathes cold. The lanes remember music even when the songs are soft. You walk among these sounds and feel how ordinary kindness stitches the first seams of peace. On a river bank in late summer, people set paper boats on the water. Candles turn the surface into a road of little suns. Faces shine for a moment and then return to shadow. A girl folds a crane with slow fingers, then folds another and another until her lap looks like a flock at rest. The wind lifts one and carries it toward a darkened bridge. The frail wings hold the weight of wishes without strain. You bow your head and feel the long ache, find a path that does not end in anger. A train out of the ruins carries a team of officers who wear armbands and write notes in hardbound books. Meetings fill offices that smell of chalk and damp paper. A quiet voice explains that a new order must begin at the door of the home and in the schoolroom before it can live in the hall of law. Decrees step outward. The old family ledger that once decided inheritance and duty yields to a register that counts each person by name and age. A land office opens in a building that still shows scorch marks near the roof. Tenants receive deeds with seals that glisten like fresh lacquer. A farmer touches the paper with 2 fingers, and then with his forehead as if it were a small shrine. Power that once lived in a landlord's gate moves into hands that know the soil by its stones. In a classroom with broken windows, a teacher writes new characters on a clean board. The script across the top of the wall speaks of a view of the person that places dignity before duty. Boys and girls sit in the same rows. A bell rings for lunch, and bowls of wheat porridge steam in the gray light. A girl raises her hand and reads a paragraph from a reader printed only weeks before. She stumbles and recovers. Her voice grows steadier. Learning feels like a warm coat put on after a long winter. A room near the palace fills with the sound of a brush on heavy paper. A document declares that the person on the throne belongs to the same human world as the people who bow before the gate. The words travel across the land and change a tone that has held for centuries. The palace garden hears a new kind of silence that is not fear and not indifference. It is the silence that follows a sentence that everyone expected and no one had yet said. In a hall of cedar, a parchment opens, and officials read in clear voices. The year is 1947, and the law that shapes the nation takes a new form that promises rights and sets limits, that invites speech and expects restraint. A short article turns the page that once held swords. War loses its seat in policy. The words feel light and the promise feels heavy, yet people carry both with care, as if carrying water to a house built on new posts. Women line up at polling places with umbrellas against a thin rain and cast votes that count in the morning. The ink on their fingers looks like a small badge, and it fades slowly. Courts hear cases with windows open to let smoke and dust drift out. Lawyers carry books in cloth sleeves. Judges speak in measured tones. A tribunal in a distant quarter hears the record of years that cannot be explained by one mouth. Names pass under lights. Sentences leave the lips of men in black robes who do not raise their voices. A sense of measure returns where there had been only noise. The city learns the difference between vengeance and judgment, the way a carpenter learns the difference between a mallet and a chisel. In the evening, you step into a bathhouse where steam smells of soap and cedar. Laughter echoes under the rafters. Old scars look like pale threads on shoulders. Talk flows to roofs that need tile, to jobs at a new plant near the river, to a pair of shoes found for a boy who grew 2 sizes in a year. A radio in the lobby plays a song with a melody that sounds like clean water over stones. A poster by the door shows a smiling family around a low table, and letters that urge thrift, effort, and gentle hearts. Reform begins to feel like habit rather than campaign. A dock wakes earlier than the city around it. Crates climb a ramp and disappear into a warehouse. A crane swings like a long arm that never tires. The clank of steel on steel becomes a kind of heartbeat. Ships from abroad bring flour and machines that purr like cats when they start and roar like engines when they take the load. Manuals in foreign letters lie open on workbenches beside notes in a neat local hand. You watch a worker in a clean cap take apart a motor and put it back together in half the time it took last month. Pride shows without noise. One winter, a river city hosts a tournament of words and ideas with guests from many countries. A hall of white pillars fills with students who wear jackets that smell of wool and rain. Translators' booths hum like beehives. The stage holds tables where visitors from abroad and scholars from home speak of charts, elections, tariffs, and the shape of a fair wage. Outside, boys skate on a pond that has frozen clear as glass. The boys fall and rise with quick laughs. The hall lights spill across the ice like a path. You feel the country step onto that path with a resolve that looks quiet and proves strong. Home remains a place where the old and new sit across the same brazier. A grandmother keeps a box of hairpins from a time before the topknot fell. A mother holds the pay envelope and counts the notes that must stretch to rent and rice and a uniform for a first-year student. A father removes his cap at the door and teaches a bow that belongs to manners older than any law. In some houses, a door closes softly on a sorrow that never finds words. In other houses, laughter rises like steam because the child who reads now reads for the whole family. How deeply the new Charter of Rights reshapes the quiet customs within these rooms remains hard to measure, as if a river were flowing under the floorboards where only the sound tells how fast it moves. Spring of 1951 brings papers spread on a table in a city by a wide bay. Delegations sign with steel pens. Ink dries, hands clasp. The treaty waits for ratification, and then the year 1952 returns the islands to full say over their own gates. Bases remain where planes lift into morning light and their engines sound like long vowels that carry across the sea. Streets in the capital lay new tracks for trams. A station opens with a roof like a folded fan. The first car rolls out of a small plant at the edge of town and the horn sounds twice. You walk at dusk along a canal where willows have grown back to their full length. Lanterns sprinkle the water with gold. A boy in a cap rides a bicycle with a brand new bell and 3 loaves in the basket. A girl in a Navy uniform stops on a bridge to read a notice about classes in science. A worker in an oil-stained jacket ties his sleeves and heads home where a low table waits with miso soup and a slice of bright pickled radish. The day ends with gratitude spoken without flourish. The sure facts sit in a calm row. The Constitution takes life in 1947 with a promise that refuses war. Land moves from landlords to hands that till it. Schools open to girls and boys together. A treaty in 1951 leads to a spring in 1952 when sovereignty returns. The uncertainty rests in the deepest rooms of the house and in the quiet balance between courtesy learned long ago and rights learned yesterday. Night gathers above tiled roofs that shine after rain, and a far whistle hints that a faster age draws near. You stand on a platform where the air smells of steel and new paint. A white nose shaped like a swift rests beneath wires that hum with morning. A clock clicks to the top of the hour. The train leaves with a soft pull that feels like breath drawn for a long swim. Windows turn fields to a green ribbon. Bridges rise and fall. Mountains fold and unfold like hands. You ride the first fast line from the capital to the city of water and light, and you feel the islands stretch without strain. That same season, a torch circles a stadium, and runners lift their knees in unison as flags gather like petals around a bright center. The city looks outward with a welcome that feels both shy and proud. Workshops learn a new rhythm. Men and women in clean caps test radios no larger than a palm. A camera shutter blinks with crisp kindness. A small cassette clicks into a player that fits a pocket and turns streets into private theaters. Car lines roll from bright floors where a cord stops the belt when a hand sees something that needs care. A foreman bows to a worker who lifts a finger and points to a flaw. The room treats that finger as a compass, and the compass swings to true. A philosopher of factories teaches that flow belongs to respect and that respect belongs to every station. Cities hum. Neon climbs. The night learns to wear color without noise. You cross a plaza where a tower of sun lifts its face above paths filled with families who read signs that speak of future kitchens and clean cities and small machines that answer to gentle touch. Children press their noses to glass and see a house where doors slide like thoughts. A boy receives a toy robot that walks for a few steps and then bows. The parents laugh and lift the boy. The day feels simple and light. A year later, the country learns to count drops of oil as if they were pearls, and hands begin to invent thrift with new patience. Stoves change. Windows change. The train that began as a symbol of speed becomes a symbol of care, because a fast line that keeps its time uses less than a clumsy one that wastes its hours. Spring opens with petals that flutter over picnic cloths. Office clerks lift cups and look up through pink. A teacher counts petals on a sleeve and smiles. The mood sweetens without neglect. Long tables in plain rooms hold charts printed with tidy lines. People speak of parts per million in exhaust, and of insulation in roofs, and of a target that must be met because the next winter will be cold for many. The city does not complain. It tightens a belt and turns off lights in hallways that do not need them. Evenings in certain districts shine too brightly. Glass towers catch every color a sign can imagine. Golf bags lean beside bars. Taxis nose along gutters. Brokers speak quickly and use numbers like lanterns that will never go out. Land becomes a story told over and over, and the story grows until it can no longer stand. The tale turns, soft at first and then sharp. A decade hands its shine to the next, and the next will not wear it. Warrens of small offices learn the sound of a phone that rings less often. A clerk looks at a ledger before closing the cover with a care that feels like a prayer for balance. The calendar reads late winter, and a new era name enters the air, like a bell note held just beyond hearing. Shocks arrive that are not of money. Steel lines crumple above a harbor as if a giant hand had pressed a palm into the map. Men in orange climb what is left and anchor cables that tremble. Volunteers pass buckets hand to hand until their shoulders burn. Food stands open with a kindness that does not ask for names. Trains crawl through darkness while officials guide people to safety with calm voices. Another morning years later turns hard in tunnels that once felt safe as a second living room. A city grieves without shouting and carries on with a quiet that does not forget. You walk a factory floor where a robot arm moves with the ease of a fish in clear water. A car that sips rather than drinks rolls to inspection and passes. Students crowd a game arcade where bright screens bloom like coral. A story about a boy and a pocket monster travels to every shore. A girl with a green bow rides on a broom in a film that feels like summer wind through reeds. A castle made of light and patience floats above a valley and teaches courage without a single hard edge. At night, a line of commuters stands along a platform and reads paper books, while the next train glides in with a whisper like silk on stone. A day of perfect blue shatters in the northeast. The ground moves for long minutes and ceiling lamps swing until they strike walls. The sea pulls away and then climbs the land as if old lines had been erased by a wave of chalk. Fields vanish. Houses turn and drift. Boats ride over bridges and into streets. The air smells of mud and salt and broken pine. A plant by the shore breathes out trouble, and workers run inward rather than away, and pull levers with hands that know what they are choosing. The months become a lesson in the weight of water and the reach of care. Photographs of school gymnasiums fill with beds and blankets and maps marked with pins. The country carries those images in a quiet place that does not grow old. On a later morning, a black car moves slowly through a gate, and a family bows to a nation that bows back. An era name closes like a book placed gently on a shelf. A new name opens like a window and lets in a phrase about harmony that is not only a wish, but a work. Trains extend their reach over mountains cut with fresh tunnels. Rice fields in the north shine in summer and then glitter with frost in winter and still deliver their promise. The capital prepares a festival of sport and then holds it a year later than planned. The stadium's bright, the stands sparse, the cicadas loud, the runners and swimmers steady, while masks turn the crowd into a quiet sea of eyes. In a narrow shop, a woman repairs a bowl with lines of gold. The crack gleams and teaches that a scar can be made into a path for light. Children learn to code in a room where slippers line up like fish along the wall. An old man ties a rope bell at a shrine and bows twice and claps twice and lowers his head. A rural town plants cedar along a slope where houses once stood. The city keeps vending machines bright even when snow climbs their sides. A ferry carries islanders and vegetables and school books past a lighthouse that glows like a patient star. You sit on a bench at dusk and listen to a train arrive on time, as if time were a friend rather than a taskmaster. Screens along shop fronts show cartoons and news and a map that tracks a typhoon. The smell of broth drifts from a noodle shop. A child tells a parent about a festival with paperfish that swim on poles. A student with a violin crosses a bridge and stops to watch carp circle below. A developer walks past and thinks about fiber lines and solar roofs and a garden on a rooftop that will collect a little dew each night. The sure events stand in a clear row. The fast train leaves in 1964, and the world takes note. A fair of ideas opens in 1970 and points to futures that arrive in bits and parts. Prices of energy jump, and a habit of thrift turns into skill. The bubble rises and falls. A new era begins in 1989. A bridge shakes in 1995, and people cross the city carrying water and hope. A wave climbs the land in 2011, and the country steadies itself with hands joined across valleys. A new name arrives in 2019. The games light the city in 2021, and the cheers rise mostly in living rooms. The thread that stays open lies in the quiet arithmetic of success and sorrow. The true share of credit among policy and thrift and alliance and timing refuses a single ledger. The right balance between a promise of peace and the duty to keep sea roads open remains unwritten on any one page. What endures is the habit of steady hands, the courtesy of small bows, and the way a train arrives and a cherry tree blooms, and a tea bowl with bright veins carries warmth into the palms of a new century. Drifts over tiled roofs and turns each eve into a soft line against the sky, and you breathe with the change as lamps grow small in doorways and shop shutters lower with gentle hands that leave no scratch on wood. And the streets take on the hush of a house that keeps watch over itself. Cicadas give way to crickets, and crickets give way to the far sound of a bell that folds the city into a single slow heartbeat. And the air tastes faintly of cedar and a little salt from the sea that never forgets these shores. You walk a lane where willow leaves comb the water, and a bridge holds the shape of a quiet smile. And beyond the bridge, a garden lies forgotten behind a wall, stones resting in moss, a narrow path of worn granite warmed by a day that has already slipped into memory. And the gate breathes a cool scent that feels older than any story just told. In the corner, a shallow basin holds the last sky, and a ladle sleeps with its handle pointing toward kindness. And a single moth circles the lantern and then settles, and the garden accepts that small visitor as if it had been expected all along. Far away, hills turn to silhouettes, and the old trees along their spines hold the night the way elders hold a family, with care and without hurry. And in the homes below those ridges, people settle on tatami and lift cups that steam a little in the dim, and the warmth rises into faces that soften as the room grows still. And a feeling like ancestral hands spreads through rafters and pillars and rests lightly on shoulders. You lie back and let the breath come and go in long tides, and the islands that carried you from shell mounds to mirrors, from bronze bells to bullet trains, quiet themselves one by one until all you hear is the soft turning of the world, and the soft turning carries you. And now, you may drift into dreams of history. End of script. Sweet dreams.